Hello, welcome to Saturday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, and on screen we have a puzzle by Ahaupt. We've done one of his puzzles before and it was absolutely stupendously good, so I'm hoping this one will also be interesting. I'll tell you the rules in just a second. I've got lots of other things to tell you about today. Those of you interested in the cryptic crossword content on the channel, we have got two things of interest, hopefully. On Patreon, Mark has solved the most recent monthly club special from the Times. This is this bonkers hard cryptic crossword that Mark attempts to do without using the dictionary. It's always very entertaining. I mean, even if you are an expert cryptic crossword solver, it's you know, there's a lot of pleasure to be gained in watching Mark struggle. Anyway, and also I have recorded my solve of Dave Gorman's cryptic crossword from The Independent. Dave Gorman obviously is one of, he's an absolutely brilliant comedian, very, very funny, very, very clever man. And we found out recently he'd been setting crosswords, so I was very pleased to solve his puzzle earlier, and it featured a couple of clues that are sort of laugh out loud in terms of, intelligence and just extremely amusing wordplay. It's definitely worth looking at. Now, what's next? Next weekend it is the German round of the World Sudoku Grand Prix. This is obviously the Grand Prix that happens monthly throughout the year. Well, it's the German round next weekend, and that means that the puzzles are set by, I think, Christoph Seeliger, Richard Stolk, Arvid Baars and Jonas Gleim. In other words, more puzzle constructing talent than you can shake a stick at. So do have a go at that. I think that the instruction booklet is already out. I'll put a link to the World Sudoku Grand Prix under the video for those of you who want to check that out. Finally, before we get onto the puzzle, tomorrow, believe it or not, is International Yoga Day. And it is also the birthday of one of our youngest viewers. So Nityant Agarwal, he's 14 years old at the moment, and he has constructed a Sudoku to celebrate the fact that tomorrow is his 15th birthday and it's International Yoga Day. So there is a community post up there at the moment with his Thermo Sudoku. Do check it out. It's a lovely puzzle. Now, let's talk about the rules of Ahaupt's puzzle for today's video. We've got normal Sudoku rules apply. Now, each number in the grid is going to correspond to a high-rise building of the appropriate height. That's right, it's skyscrapers. If an arrow is shown in a cell, the number in that cell indicates how many high-rise buildings can be seen in this direction from the ground. Larger buildings hide the smaller ones behind. And look, I've got an example. Let me just find it. Is this going to work if I put this up? Maybe that'll work. Yeah, that looks okay, doesn't it? Maybe if I move that over there. Oh, that's not allowing me to do that. Oh, bobbins. I don't know how to make that work, but hopefully you guys can see it. So what does he say about the example? He says, pay particular attention to the arrow next to the left-hand 2. That's this arrow here. Because although 2 is greater than 1, you can see both skyscrapers 1 and 3 from the ground. I see what he's saying. He's saying that don't think that you're standing on this building of size 2 looking up to see how many buildings you can see. You're not. You always have to, when you're in a cell, you imagine you're on the ground in that cell looking to see how many buildings you can see. So if you were on the ground in this cell, you could see the building of height 1 and the building of height 3 behind it. So this arrow is saying, well, there's only one square to the left of this, so this would always have to contain a 1. This one contains a 2 because you can see the 3 immediately. You can see the 4 poking out above the 3, but you can't see the 1 because it's obscured by both the 3 and the 4. So it's classic skyscrapers, but the thing that struck me when I saw this grid was it's a beautiful construction already. There are not that many arrows here. Now this is going to produce a unique solution, so it should be a really, really interesting puzzle. It's got sort of it's way over 90% rating on Logic Masters Germany, and yeah, do have a go. You click on the link under the video to play, and with that, let's get cracking. Okay, so what I tend to do with puzzles like this is to find arrows that are reasonably close to an edge, like this arrow here, because this can't be higher than a 3 because there are only 3 cells above it, and however those 3 cells are arranged, this square would have to take one of those digits. So similarly here, similarly here. So in fact, look, there's a 1, 2, 3 triple in the middle box. Now look at these two cells. These two cells see a maximum of 5 cells in their respective direction. And they can't be 1, 2s or 3s because there's already 1, 2, 3 in the box. So these have to be a 4, 5 pair. So the other cells... okay, so this cell is now important because this cell has to be 6, 7, 8 or 9. So let's have a think about that in the context of whatever we put next to this arrow. If we put a 5 next to this arrow, how can we fulfill that 5 condition? We need to see 5 buildings now below this cell. Well, we could see a 6 there. That would be okay. That's 1 building. We won't see the 1, 2 or 3, however, or whichever number we put in here, because the 6 is always higher than the 3, and they are the highest and lowest digits respectively. So we will see a maximum of 4 squares. If we make that 6, 7, 8, 9, we only see 4 squares. We can never see this square. This can never be a 5. That's a 5. That's a 4. That's a 5. And in fact, because we never see that square, there's only one arrangement that will ever work here. We have to do that. That's the only way you're ever going to see 4 cells in this direction. So this square sees 3 cells. It sees the 7, the 8, then the 9. So actually we're off to a good start here. These squares are 7, 8 and 9 in some order. So this 5 clue, we're definitely going to see whatever is in that cell because it's a small building. We'll then see that one as well. 1, 2. So we need to see 3 more buildings. These have to be ascending and they all have to be greater than 4. And 5 actually. Right, so this is like a thermometer. This has to be 6, 7, 7, 8 and 8, 9 into these 3 squares. If I try and put an 8 into this square, for example, or you can see 8, 9 broken. So 7, 8, 9 would work. 6 and then 7 or 8, 8 or 9. Yeah, this looks nice now. So can we deduce anything else? One thing I might think about in a minute is highlighting the arrows I've used actually, because in fact I am going to do that. I'm going to highlight the arrows I've used just because otherwise I keep scanning them and rechecking them and that's not efficient. These 3 squares have got to be 1, 2 and 5 to complete the column. Let's have a look at this square. Look, this square has 2 arrows pointing at it that are the same distance away from the square. So if we try and put a 9 in that square, this square here, if we try and make that a 9, what would we have to put in this square and this square? Well, we'd have to put 2 in both of those squares because they're always going to see the building before the 9 and they're never going to see anything after the 9. So this can never be a 9 because we can't put 2 2s in the same row. The 9 shifts up there. Okay, so now what are the options then for these? So this square, what can it be? It can't be a 1 because it's going to see a 3 and then a 7 or an 8. So it could be a 2. It can't be a 3. It could be a 4, couldn't it? Because if it goes 3, 7, it could go 8, 9 later. But that's the maximum it can be. It can only be 2 or 4 because this digit is too high, or this building is too high for us to see any more than 4 squares here. If we try and make this a 5, we can see 3, 7, 8, 9. That's 4 maximum. So this is a 2 or a 4. And this presumably is a mirror of that because... yeah, this must be the same because it's exactly the same logic. where you're always seeing that square, you're always seeing that square, but you can only ever see 2 cells after this one. So there's a 2-4 pair, which means this is a 1, this is a 2. Oh, this is gorgeous setting. Look here. We've got this run of 3 squares that are all reasonably large numbers. So if we try and make this a 4, how can we fulfill that? Well, the only way of this being a 4 would be if this was a 7, and then we have to put 8 and 9 into those 2 squares. But we can't put 8 and 9 into these 2 squares because this square has to be one of those digits. So actually we know the order. This has to be the 4, this has to be the 2. So this has to be a 7, this has to be the 8 and the 9 this way. Those 2 squares have got to be 5 and 6, and that's going to resolve that one. That can't be a 6 anymore. So 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3 into those squares. And the 2 is working because it sees 1, 2, and that's all it sees. 7 means those 2 squares are not 7. These squares are 4, 5, and 7, I think. So those squares have got to be 1, 3, and 6. Okay. Now the challenge, I think, is going to be to work out where on earth we have to look now. 1, 2... Actually, 9s are a little bit interesting, look, because you can never put a 9 on an arrow. Because I mean, I think it's pretty obvious why not, but obviously any arrow cell, it sees a maximum of 8 cells. So it can only have a maximum of 8 as a clue. So if you look, the 9s are quite interesting here. The 9s in this box get locked into one of 2 positions, and these 9s do exactly the same because you've got a symmetrical displacement or placement of arrows in both of these, of box 7 and box 9. Oh, this is gorgeous. This is absolutely gorgeous. So now we actually know which way round these 9s go. And it's because it's a bit like an X-wing. We know that the arrangement of the 9s is either going to be, if this is a 9, because this won't be a 9 therefore, you'd have these 2. So you're either going to have 9s in these 2 squares, or you're going to have 9s in these 2 squares. One of those things must be true. Now the interesting thing about this arrangement is that these 9s are now adjacent to arrows that point at them. This cell and this cell. So what numbers do you have to put in those cells? You've got to put 1s in them, because they obviously can't see any further than the 9 that's in front of their eyes. And that's not going to work, because now we get 2 9s in row 8 of the grid. How beautiful is that? That's stunning. I've never seen that in a sort of skyscraper Sudoku before. At least I don't remember ever having seen it. Now, is that going to be useful? So we can't put a 9 in that arrow, so let's put the 9s up there. We can put the 9s in one of 3 positions in box 1. Okay. So what do I need to do now? Perhaps I need to look at this square. And I like the look of this square because there's a 7 not far from it. So the options for this square, especially with the 9 down here, are relatively low. It's definitely going to see 2. That's absolutely certain. But the only way it sees 3 is if the 8 is in one of those 3 squares. Now the 8 could be down here. So this has to be a 2 or a 3. That's the only options. It either sees just those or it sees a third one up there somewhere. So that is restricted, but it's not restricted enough. So this arrow has a similar property. It's only 3 cells between it and a 7. The 9 is hidden. And this can't be a 2. Right, so this... Oh, and that's quite interesting as well. This cell can't be an 8 or a 9. So it has to be lower than a 7. So this square is... It needs to be higher than 2, but it can't be that much higher than 2. It can be 3. And it can be 4. But it can't be 5. It can be 4 because you could have a digit higher than the 7. The 8 could go, or the 8 can only go in that square actually. So 1, 2, 3, 4 would be how that has to look. The only other option is 3 because it can't be a 2. So this is a 3 or a 4. Okay. So now the cell I think is interesting is this one, which can't be a 1, 5, 7, 8 or a 9. So this has to be 2, 3, 4 or 6. But you can see that it's interacting with these 2 cells. So we need to work out what the possibilities are here. So... yeah, I mean this can never be a 2 because it's underneath a 1. So let's get rid of that option for a start. Now it can't be a 3 either for the same reason basically. If we try and make this square a 3, we've now got to hide 2 buildings behind the 3. And we can only hide a 2. We can't. The other one will be bigger than a 3 axiomatically because it can't be a 1 and then it couldn't be a 2. So this can't be a 3. So this is a 4 or a 6. Ah, there you go. There you go. Now this can't be a 3. Because if this is a 3, it forces 4, 6 like this. So this now has to see 4 buildings. But it can't. It sees a 6, a 7, and it can see an 8 maximum. It can only see 3 buildings. So actually, we're done. That has to be a 2. That's actually not as hurt. I thought that would be a much bigger breakthrough than it seems to want to be. 6. Oh, here's something though. This 2 is more important than I thought. Why? Well, it sees 2 already. So it can't see an 8. There's no 8 up there. Where does the 8 go in column 3? It has to sit down there. That means there's an 8 over here, and an 8, that can't be an 8. So we get an 8-9 pair at the top of the grid. Ah, and that's perfect. Ah, is it perfect? Yes, it is perfect. Now this can't be a 4. Because if this is a 4, that's a 6, 7, and there's no more latitude at all. Because the 8's hidden, the 9's hidden. So this has to be a 3. And even 3 is difficult. This now can't be a 6 because that would only see 2. This has to be a 4. So this has to be between, this has to be 5 or 6. This is not 1. These are 1, 5 and 6 to complete the row. The one clue now, that, have I broken the, no, it's okay, it's okay. It sees a 4 and this has to be the highest digit it sees. So we have to hide 2 and 3 beneath it. Don't know the order, but those have got to be 1, 5, 6 now. 1 in one of those 2 cells. So up here we've got 1, 3, 5 and 6 to place. So this square, well, that can't possibly be a 1. Because even if you make that a 5, you've still got 5 digits. You've got to hide behind the 5 there, and there aren't 5 digits below 5 you can hide. So this is not 1. Ah, that's an interesting column. Look at that column. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 in this column. So this square, this little square here, has to be 6, 7, 8 or 9. And that is being seen by both of these arrows. So we've got to, I think, concentrate on this. Yeah, I mean, if that's a 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is not a 6. There's not enough capacity for that to be a 6. In fact, I'm just noticing this. There's a big restriction on 9s in this row. Look, where does the 9 go? It's often actually a very good thing in skyscrapers to focus just on the very highest digit. Now this can be a 9, this can be a 9, this can be a 9, but that's it. You can't put a 9 in the arrow cell. And you can't put a 9 there for the same reason we couldn't put a 9 here. If we put a 9 here, these two squares would both have to be equal 2, and they can't. So actually the 9 is in one of those two cells, which means... So the options for this square, therefore, if this is a 9, obviously this has to be a 1. If this is a 9, 1, 2, 3, no, this is nice. If this is a 9, if this is a 9, what can this be? That's the question I'm thinking about. So it's going to see a 6, 7 or an 8 in this position. And then these two numbers will be hidden, whatever we do. So that doesn't work at all. It's impossible. Because there's a 2 and a 3 in the column here. So this can, if this is a 9, it can see 1, 2, maximum of 3. It doesn't work. This is not the 9. Right, that's really cool, because now we get the 9 here, we can place the 1. This can no longer be a 5, that's got to be a 3, that places a 1 here, and now we are cooking with gas. We can make progress again. 1, 3, this has to be a 6. That can't be a 1. So this square now maybe, because we've got a 2 arrow pointing... I've not been very diligent about labelling my arrows, have I? No, I really haven't. I'm going to abandon it. Sorry. Let's look at this square though. So this arrow is fulfilled. This arrow needs to see whatever is in this square, but because this can be a 2, that's not that helpful. So this column, perhaps, let's look at the column. We need 3, 4, 8, 9. So this, that's got to be 4 or 8 by Sudoku. And we can't make that an 8, because then the 2 clue would be broken. It couldn't see 2 cells, so that's a 4. It got me nothing. Oh, it gets me that one. That's got to be a 2 now, because it's got to be below a 4 so that this one sees 3. 5s are locked into the same 2 rows. Look now, in 2 different 3x3 boxes. So where does the 5 go in row 3 of the grid? It's got to be in one of those 2 cells. This 9 sees the 9 and the 8 in the centre. So there's an 8 in one of those 2 cells. That's the same trick now we can play with the 8s. That fixes an 8 into this square, look. So this, that one can't be a 9 anymore because of the 9 here. So we need 5, 6 and 7 into these open cells. And that one's not 5 or 6. So that one is 7. So we're doing a little bit of Sudoku all of a sudden. Okay. So I've got these arrows here. I don't really want to use those yet, I have to say, because they're so far apart. It just feels like, unless I know where the 9 goes, 9 could be here. Actually, the 9 is locked into one of 2 positions, so actually this cell is interesting, and that the reason this one is interesting is because this cell has to be at least equal to 8. So the options for this square, if this is a 9, this would have to be a 2. If this is an 8, it's going to see exactly 3 cells, because it's going to always see this one, it's going to see the 8, and then it's going to see the 9 in that square. So this square actually is restricted. That has to be a 2 or a 3. So the rest of that option is 2, 3, 4 and 7. Right, okay, so let's maybe this arrow, because this arrow sees an 8 fairly early on, doesn't it? And then it sees a 9 as well. So this square, 1, 2, it never sees the 2 or the 3. 3, 4. This has to be less than or equal to 4. It can't be 1 or 2. So this is a 3 or a 4. Apologies if you'll see it. I probably can tell what that is, but I'm not seeing how to. Let's try this one. So this definitely sees an 8 and a 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is the maximum for this. Maybe it could be 4, but it can't be 3, and it can't be 2, because the 8 and the 9 are always visible, as are some of these cells, at least one of them. So this is 4 or 5. So close to cracking, isn't it? So close to cracking. I think I'm literally one deduction away and the whole thing will topple. What is that? What is it I'm missing here? It would be very nice to know that this was 4. So let's think about that. Can this be 5? If it's 5, this has to be a strictly increasing sequence. And there you go. That's what fixes it. It can't be 5 because this square can't be a 1, 2 or a 3. So this square, whatever we put in it, it's always hiding this cell here. And once this cell is hidden, this can't be a 5. So this has to be 4. That means that one is a 3, that's a 2, that's a 3. Now, it's quite interesting actually, isn't it? So in order to make this 4 possible, we've got to be very careful, because this square here can't be too high, or it will... If this was 7, for example, this would only be 3. It can't be 6. So this has to be 5. And it has to be 5 so that we can just make this a 6. And that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 we need. So this is a 5. That means that's a 5. This is a 1. There's no 5 in those 2 squares. Those 2 are 1 and 7 to complete the row. But if that's a 1, 6 pair, that's got to be a 7 itself. So that's a 1 and a 3 up there. That's a 2, which means this can't be an 8. That's got to be the 9. That fixes that this is a 9 by Sudoku. None of those squares are equal to 2 anymore. The 4 here fixes that that one's a 4. And we can figure that out. That's a 3, 7 pair. That's got to be a 5, therefore, because there's a 4 in the column. Whoopsie, I need to do that. Let's get rid of those. That fixes the 4 and the 7. You can see I should be able to write 7 into this square. Looks like it's working. These two squares are 2 and 6. That's also working. That fixes the 6 and the 5. So those two squares are 4 and 5, which we can't resolve just yet. But this 3 might be important. Yeah, 3, 2. That's a 2 by Sudoku. Six, 4, 5. Ah! Okay, let's look at those two. What do we need up there? We need a 3, don't we? Yeah, 3 and 8. 5, oh no, 6 and 7. So 1, 4, 5 and 6 into this square here. Ah, the 5, 6 is interesting. So that becomes a 1 or a 4. That becomes a 1 or a 4. And there you go. That's the final piece of the jigsaw, because my phone's going mad. But this square can't be a 1, obviously, because that would require this to be a 9. So this has to be a 4. That fixes that this is a 1. That gets the 1 and the 5 and the 6, the 6 and the 7, the 7 and the 3 and the 8. Now we have to check this. So this sees 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Now the 4 fixes the 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, 1. Check. And that is how to solve Ahaupt's puzzle. A beautiful, beautiful Sudoku puzzle. Loved it. I hope you guys enjoyed watching me solve it. And let me know how you got on in the comments. And see you soon on Cracking the Cryptic.